you ever felt like your career goals are just out of reach? Like you're ready to make big moves, but not sure where to start? If so, you're in the right place. Welcome to the 12 Days of Career Goals, the leading online conference for advancing your career and reaching your career goals in 2025. I'm Teresa White, career clarity expert, 5-time certified career coach, and your host of the 12 Days of Career Goals. We are bringing together 21 of the most respected career growth experts to deliver the actionable steps, insider strategies, and confidence you need to land big wins in your career. From exclusive live sessions and video replays to a Slack community of like-minded professionals and practical resources you can implement right away, this conference is packed with everything you need to turn your career dreams into reality. And the best part? It's completely free if you register by December 13th. So grab your spot and let's dive into the 12 days. Welcome back to the 12 Days of Career Goals. Today's session is all about taking control of your workplace experience by mastering the art of managing up and setting boundaries. These essential skills can transform your work life, helping you navigate tricky dynamics, reduce stress, and foster collaboration. But where do you start when the stakes are high and the conversation seems so daunting? Get ready for powerful insights and practical strategies to shape a career that works for you. Joining me today are two absolutely incredible experts, Melody Wilding and Anna Goehner. Melody Wilding is the best-selling author of Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking, and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work, and the forthcoming Managing Up, How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge that is coming out March 2025. As an award-winning executive coach for more than a decade, she's helped top performers in leadership at the world's most successful companies, including Google, JP Morgan, and Verizon, reclaim a sense of confidence and control at work. She's a regular contributor to HBR, Forbes, Fast Company, and MSNBC. Anna Goehner is a career well-being strategist, writer, speaker, and LinkedIn learning instructor. With a career coaching and HR background, Anna helps professionals prioritize well-being over the hustle with practical work-life strategies for workplace boundaries, career advice, targeted job search, and flexibility at work. Her insights have been featured in Business Insider, Fast Company, Time Magazine, HuffPost, and LinkedIn News. Welcome, Melody. Welcome, Anna, to the 12 Days of Career Goals.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
I am so happy to have both of you here with us today. And I want to kick it off with you, Melody. You have this amazing book coming out in March 2025, Managing Up. And the book tackles a skill set that so many professionals really struggle with, but often don't know how to approach. And I'm wondering what inspired you to write this book, and how did your own experiences shape the practical strategies you share? We can't hear you, Melody. No, we can't hear you. We'll give it a moment. Yep, sounds good. Anna, I'll kick it off while Melody.
How about now?
Oh, we can hear you, Melody.
Yay!
Perfect.
I'm
You're
back.
good.
I'm back. Technology has not been my friend today. So, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And you were asking what led me to write Managing Up. And the reason is my first book came out in 2021, and that book was called Trust Yourself. And it was all about how do you stop overthinking things at work? How do you stop being a people pleaser? And what I noticed again and again and again is that people were coming to me with questions, struggling to figure out where they stand in the workplace. And they were blaming themselves when they were overthinking writing an email to their boss, or if they felt like they misstepped in a meeting with their leadership. But what I realized, what was underneath all of that, was the fact that no one really teaches us how do we navigate these invisible dynamics that are happening all around us, and how do we influence other people even when we don't have positional power. And this is so much more complicated now because of the pandemic. We're in hybrid organizations. We're working with people across the world that have different personalities and styles than us. Work is moving faster than ever before. So, what really led me to write this book is that there was no modern guide, there was no guide to how work works today to manage up that had practical step by step tactics and scripts. And I think what really, you asked what in my background drew me to write this. It was not only that I have had so many times in my own career where I have felt powerless to what was going on around me in my relationships with the people above me, but second, my background is also in psychology and as a therapist. And I really believe that if the future of work is about people, then we have to know how humans behave. And so that is what managing up is really about. It's really trying to understand human behavior and how do you influence, persuade, get buy-in for your ideas, build relationships and trust.
I love that. And you touched on something that we hear a lot is that people feel powerless. And I love that you're giving people a guide and actionable strategies that can help them take back the power that they should have never lost in the first place. But as our society and the workplaces are set up, you're giving them tools to navigate that. Before we dive deeper into the actionable strategies, I want to bring Anna in here. And Anna, you've built a career helping professionals prioritize well-being and set boundaries. Can you share a personal story where you struggled with these challenges yourself? And how did you navigate that situation? And how does it inform the way you now guide others?
Sure. So I'm originally from Brazil, and I grew up in an environment that being selfless was a badge of honor. And you had to be humble, you had to be a good girl. And those words, they all meant like saying yes to everything, running on empty. I watch my mom, I watch my aunts, I watch all the community around me, all the women. I always felt like they were always running on empty, but it was almost like that was the way. So I grew up with this ideal that you had to be selfless and you had to say yes to everybody and always put yourself last. Then after college, I moved to the United States and I went, straight to the corporate America, and I worked in corporate America for more than a decade. And I brought these ideals from my country with me. So I would say yes to everything in the workplace, yes to everyone. I would bring work home. And I came with this idea that hard work is the way to climb the ladder. And the hard work in my brain always felt like I had to please others. I had to say yes to everyone. I could never push anything back because that would mean, oh, I'm not a team player. And all those things, into I got sick. I just had a lot of health problems and I didn't know nobody. I remember seeing four different doctors and they couldn't tell me exactly what was wrong with me. They had to put some sort of code, so they would get paid, but they couldn't tell me what was wrong. Until I had to do the work myself and learn about boundaries. And I started like, and this is something that we're going to talk about today. If you are used to saying yes to everyone and everything, it's really hard to go from a yes to a straight no. And that's what people think sometimes boundaries are. Like you just have to say like a straight no. So we're going to talk about that. So I started talking, I started learning about low stakes boundaries, negotiating, like giving alternative responses, pausing, and all these different things. And the workplace became a better environment for me once I made that change myself. And today what I do is helping other people feel, the way I felt once I started implementing those boundaries in the workplace. And I'll say this, we all need boundaries. I feel like, as Melanie was saying, human behavior, I feel like we all need boundaries. We all need to know where, when something is not working for you. Like I can't really take this call this time, but how do you say no gracefully? How do you provide an alternative? So yeah, that's bits and pieces of my story. But yeah, like once you start having health issues, it's really important to try to figure out how you can get yourself better, and boundaries are my number one tip to actually get better.
Thanks for sharing that, Anna. And I'm always inspired by your story. There are so many people that can relate of their work environment affecting their mental health, physical health. And I want to give Melody a moment too. Is that something you hear about a lot, these types of experiences?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think people pleasing is one of the most common, sneaky sabotagers that happens for professionals because it masquerades as being helpful, right? And I have seen so many times where people, they pride themselves on being the one who's the fixer, the one who's always volunteering, and in many respects that is what does help you get ahead when you are earlier in your career. But there comes a point where if you're not saying no, then people can perceive it as you don't know how to prioritize. You don't know how to push back and have hard conversations about trade-offs when they need to happen. And so I've seen too many people come to me because they've been told they're not willing to put me on this bigger project because I'm being told I don't know how to prioritize. And that's what can happen is actually we think we're doing good, but the perception it creates is actually the opposite of what we want.
That is incredibly insightful. Thanks for sharing that thought, Melody. Now, when we start about setting boundaries, and Anna had touched on starting with low stake boundaries, in the beginning, setting boundaries, that can feel like a confrontation. How do you suggest framing the boundary conversation so it is not a confrontation, but more about fostering collaboration and not resistance? Is there a script or an example that you can help so you can guide our listeners to empower them having those conversations?
Yeah, I'll give two different of my favorite tools in this area because you're right. I like to say that saying no is a complete sentence in most areas of life, but at work, that's usually not the case. Because if you imagine if you asked for something from a colleague and literally all they responded to you was no, you would kind of be like, did I offend them? Did I upset them? And so at work, we do have to be more diplomatic when we say no in order to preserve our relationships and our reputation with people. So, two of my favorite approaches that work really well are first is the trade off approach. So, the trade off approach is all about presenting options and then putting it back in your manager's hand to say, what do you think we should do? So, for example, it's saying something like, I'm focused on getting X done by the deadline we agreed on. Adding this new thing to that would impact that original timeline. How would you like us to reprioritize that? Or to make room for these meetings, I can do that, but I need to delegate some of my current tasks. Which do you recommend I hand off? So it's yes, I can do this, but there's a trade off here. How comfortable are you on what we slow down on or what we deprioritize or reprioritize? So that's the first tactic I would say is that trade off approach. The second is what's called the positive no. And this comes from William Ury. He wrote a great book. He's at the Harvard School for Negotiation. And he wrote a great book called Getting to Yes. And the positive no is all about giving an alternative of what you can do. So let's say your boss comes to you with a deadline that is really not reasonable to get a slide deck done. You may say, I can't get this entire deck done by Friday, but what I can do is have a draft, have an outline of all of the slides for you to look at. How does that work? So you can, instead of just saying like flat out, no, that's completely unreasonable, I can't do that, you're sharing, here's what I can do. So you look collaborative, you're being a team player, but you're also setting expectations and limits around what's reasonable.
Those are two great strategies, trade-off and giving a lower yes, a reasonable yes to what you can actually do. And that feels incredibly empowering for people when you know you don't just have to say yes and then figure out how you're going to make it happen.
Yeah. Yes.
And Anna, as you always emphasize well-being over hustle, for professionals struggling demanding managers and often unclear boundaries, what are some of the red flags that indicate they need to reevaluate their work dynamics? Or what's some of the red flags that show that we should start implementing strategies like the ones Melody just shared with us? And how can they identify moments of opportunity to introduce change?
Sure. So constant fatigue and burnout, stress, if you feel like, because sometimes there are going to be times at work that, you have deadlines, so stress is there. But if this is ongoing, that can lead to burnout. So if you feel like you're always running on empty, as I say earlier, that's one of the red flags. Another one would be blurred lines between personal time and work all the time. When you feel like, let's say, it's 9 p.m. and you constantly feel like you have to be checking your emails and replying to emails because everybody on the team is replying to emails. Instead of, maybe you're reading a bedtime story to your child, for example. Instead of doing that, you have to be looking at your phone. When you have, of course, difficulty saying no, even as Melanie mentioned, like when it's more of a trade-off, a negotiation, even in those situations, when you feel like I can't really say that, I have to say yes. When you feel like, as I was saying, increase this stress and then like anxiety, you always feel anxious every time you look at your email because you keep getting more and more work. And when you neglect your personal priorities, let's say you made a commitment to attend an event at 7 p.m., but something came up at 4 p.m. and you feel the need to continue to work. And then instead of going have fun with a friend, for example, go attend an event or something, you feel like you need to be there. You need to prioritize work over your personal life. And also when your relationships, you start feeling like there's, your relationships like strained relationships, like you stop seeing your friends, you stop checking in with your friends, like you don't feel like you have a community or anybody, you can talk to because you just kind of forgot about them in a sense that you're not checking in, you're not, it's just because you're just so focused on like working all the time. So those are some of the red flags. And what I would say is, before like you let's say there is like something that came in at 9 p.m., do you really need to reply to that email? Can you put like an auto-respond? And I'll give you a tip that I personally have done in multiple jobs, including my last job. My last job was in HR, corporate job. I would, in my signature, when you have, your name and your title, I would add the hours that I worked, that I was available, because I used to work with a global team. So they would know that those were the times that I would be available. And sometimes, depending what I had going on, after the work hours, I would put an autoresponder saying that if something is urgent, then, here's my work number. You can send me a text or reach out to me. And if this is not urgent, tomorrow morning you're gonna hear from me, my time. And that has helped, decrease the amount of expectations that I was going to reply to things right away. So this is something that I would suggest, and and it worked for me, and it might work for somebody else too.
I love that suggestion, Anna. And Anna, as you were talking about the red flags that we see, the word that came to me is workaholic. And I wonder, Melody, is that a word that you hear about in your work a lot? And how does that tie into it?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. In my work, we talk a lot about over functioning, which is when you're taking on too much responsibility for things that maybe not are, should be your responsibility or are out of your control. And when you overfunction, the problem is that it can create this dynamic where other people start to underfunction. It's like the classic, leader who, instead of giving their team coaching or correction, is like, oh, I'll just fix it. Right. And so the team never really learns how to do something for themselves. Or, as I was mentioning before, if you're always the one raising your hand, the first to volunteer, then other people know, well, Teresa will raise her hand. I don't have to raise my hand. And so overfunctioning, it leads you to burnout and exhaustion, and it creates this terrible dynamic where other people are not stepping up, they're not learning the skills they need to. And I think this ties to one thing I would add on to all of Anna's great comments, which is that a very, very telltale sign that you need stronger boundaries is you have a feeling of resentment. And resentment is a really, really strong emotional signal that you feel maybe taken advantage of, you've let a situation go on for too long without addressing it, or you've made a commitment that you no longer feels an integrity or that you can follow through on. So I would encourage everyone to, now's a good time of year to be taking stock of where do you feel even, resentment starting to build, because that's a sign that you need to recalibrate, you need to set some limits there.
That is such a great way to take inventory at the end of the year of ourselves. And it can be a really big red flag now that we know about it to be like, okay, there's something I need to pay attention to. And Melanie, you consistently emphasize the importance of reclaiming control at your work. Can you share a moment from your coaching experience where someone really changed and transformed their experience through one of those workplace conversations? Mm-hmm. And how did their confidence or their career change as a result?
Yeah. So my new book, Managing Up, is based around 10 key conversations you need to have to get what you need from the people in charge. And we've been talking about the boundaries conversation. That actually happens to be one of them. But another one of them is called the styles conversation. And this is one that I think is really overlooked. We talk about like, what goals should I be working towards and what are your key priorities? But we often skip over how we work together and someone's communication style and preferences. And many times those are the biggest sources of things we overthink. Like, why was that person short with me? Or my boss seems like they're all over the place. They have all these big ideas and they're changing directions constantly. And when you don't understand someone's baseline style, you may read into things. You may feel misunderstood because your approach is different from theirs. And so the most common dynamic I see where this comes up is people who are dealing with bosses that have a more dominant style. And in the book, I call these commanders, people that are more assertive, they move fast, they tend to be very direct and to the point. And for those of us like myself that tend to like to lead with more context, tend to be more people-oriented, it can feel like polar opposite. And so I've had many clients, one in particular, her CEO was of this sort of commander type. And he would get so frustrated with her one-on-ones where she would be explaining, okay, here's what happened and here's how this team felt about it and here's what we're dealing. And he would get so frustrated and say, can you just get to the point? And I don't really care about people's feelings. I just want to know, are these things getting done? And it really created this rift between them. I actually tell the story in the introduction of the book. It got to the point where he said to her, I don't know if you're actually the right fit in this role. But when she realized there were subtle ways she could tweak how she was communicating with him, having the bottom line up front instead of leading with context and her rationale, she got to the bottom line. This is what I need from you in this conversation. She started writing her emails to him, one-line responses and bullet points rather than paragraphs and lots of data. And he didn't care. He just wanted the main point. And she started framing her progress in terms of results, outcomes, and less in terms of how people felt about it and how morale was, because she knew he was much more results oriented and much more like task oriented. And so when she did this, actually, she emailed me a few months later and said, like, I can't believe how things have turned around. He was considering her his like right-hand person. She got a huge bonus because she was able to relate to him better. He could actually then hear her ideas when she brought them to the table. And she was brought into more strategic meetings And so I think that's the power of understanding the styles conversation, is that you can make these subtle changes that lead to really big results in how you get buy-in and how someone else respects you and hears your ideas.
That is a powerful example, Melody. Thank you for sharing that story. And a follow-up question: how do you recommend for someone to go about it? So if one of our listeners, they feel, okay, I now realize my manager has a very different communication style. Do you recommend for them to have a conversation with the manager, or do you recommend for them to kind of figure it out on their own of what will resonate with them?
Yeah. Yeah. In all cases, I think having an explicit conversation would be preferred. But, sometimes it might not be part of your culture. And sometimes people aren't even fully aware of what their own style is. So observe, you have to keep your eyes open. How does your manager like to email? And if you do have an explicit conversation, you want to be asking things around, okay, what are your preferences around when I should use Messenger versus pick up the phone and call you? I have clients who, if they need to get in touch with their boss, it's better that they text them because that person never looks at their team messages. And so you have to know those kind of things. And also putting things out there like, we're going to disagree. We're going to have disagreements, or there's going to be times where I want to give you feedback or you need to give me feedback. So I would love to talk about, how do we handle that? And how do you want to receive that information from me? How can I get that across to you in the best way possible? And so put it out there, kind of call out the elephant in the room that we're going to disagree. We're going to have to give feedback. It puts you more on equal footing with your manager versus feeling like you are just a subordinate and you have to, take everything you're given from them. But now's a great time of year to be having those reset conversations, to say, I'm looking ahead to Q1 and I want to make sure we can be as successful as possible in our work together. So to do that, I would like to know a little bit more about whatever it is. What are your preferences around project updates? What are areas that you feel comfortable with me making decisions independently versus when you want to be looped in? You can use the context of the end of the year to kick off that conversation.
Love that. And my key takeaway is to really be clear and explicit, to not have all these assumptions and hoping that you're doing it right, but putting yourself on equal footing and asking those questions and having the conversation. And hopefully the manager that you work with is receptive to it and then can guide you in saying, like, this is how I prefer you to communicate. This is what I need from you. And maybe we'll actually, through that exercise, I would imagine we're going to discover a lot of stories that we tell ourselves in our head, like, oh, he or she's upset when I do this, or he or she is annoyed, or he or she wants to hear from me every day. And maybe those aren't even true.
Yeah.
And that would
exactly.
take a huge load off us and our stress levels.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And Anna, talking about stress, workplace boundaries often overlap with mental health. What's a simple but effective boundary setting strategy you recommend to help professionals protect their well-being without jeopardizing their growth?
Sure. So let's talk again about low stakes boundaries. And, there might be different names out there, but it's basically like you're providing an alternative, you kind of saying no, but you're being gentle. So I want to give you 5 here really quick. So limited time conversations. Somebody, let's say, stop unannounced by your desk and they go on and on and on and on about some story, just telling, excuse me, I'm sorry, but I really have to finish something. Can we set up a time to talk, or can we circle back around 4 o'clock and, talk about this later? That's one of them. The second one, dedicated quiet time. That's one of my favorites. Even as an entrepreneur, I do that myself, is setting up time in your calendar for focus work or a break, or, I just want to take lunch or go for a walk or something, but set up time in your calendar to do something for yourself. It could mean finishing up a project that you really need, to focus on. Third one, response time for messages and emails. I already mentioned that about putting an auto response, but if you have, let's say, a priority project, you can let your team know, hey, I'm not going to be online on the instant messenger thing, but if you need me, this is how to reach me. I really need to finish this, because otherwise, like, there's a lot of ongoing conversations that sometimes you don't even need to be a part of, and they keep going, and it's just distractions, right? So you don't need that. Fourth one, lunch or break time. A lot of us don't take lunch or breaks. So I highly recommend, even if we're talking 15 minutes, and if you can, step away from your desk. Even if you're just gonna walk around the hall and stretch your legs, take that time. It's really important to just kind of reset your mind and get, away from, what's going on around your desk and your laptop and stuff. So it's really, I would highly recommend that one. And the last one is buffer time between meetings. Back to back meetings, they can be so hard, especially when you have a lot of work going on, and like you feel like you have to be on, in all these meetings. If you are on camera, if I feel like it can be draining, right? So one thing that my previous company implemented was like it's almost like a meeting SOP kind of thing, like a standard, thing that we had to follow in the company, meaning 45-minute meetings or 55-minute meetings, and a break in between meetings. And I feel like you can do that too. Put like those 5 minute, 10 minutes breaks in your calendar between meetings, so people don't go and start, like, I don't know, you have 3 back-to-back meetings. That can be a lot. So one thing that I want to say here, just to close this loop here, is we think sometimes that we don't have control over calendars. Let's say you are an early manager or even as an individual contributor, but you do. You can go there and set up busy time, breaks and things. Nobody's seeing that. And if they ask, just say, I'm gonna need a break after this meeting, or I need, I don't know, just come up with something, but you have control over your calendar. It feels like you don't, but you do. Go there like right now, not now, but after this event, and start setting up breaks and busy time for yourself, so you can take a break.
I love these actual strategies, Anna. And it goes back to being in charge and taking charge of our own time and having power over when we do what. We might not be able to do this all the time, but there are times where we can. And I'm definitely going to be taking that note on break time away from myself, especially during this event. So this is going to be my takeaway for today. But I also really agree, and you've said that before, Anna, is putting yourself on your calendar. That, even if it is a 15-minute break, but that is your time for yourself, and how much of a difference that can make in your entire day, that for 15 minutes, you're your own priority. And it will change so much in how you feel overall in your day. Now, talking about boundaries and everything at work, there's a lot of tough conversations out there. And especially when we think about talking about pay, talking about our workload, talking about career advancement, those are really difficult conversations. Melody, I'm wondering, in your experience, which of these types of conversation tends to be the most challenging to initiate? And are there any steps you can recommend that someone can take to build their confidence and start those conversations?
Yeah, I'll talk about feedback, because I think that's one, like when you need to give some sort of feedback to your manager. I think that comes up often where we may not be happy or satisfied, or something that our manager is doing or a decision they made doesn't feel like it works for us. Yet we're hesitant to speak up because you don't want to offend the person who controls your paycheck and your future at the company. So what do you do? And I think when it comes to giving feedback up your chain of command, actually, this goes down and across as well. But I would, before you say anything, I like to say, think about your ABCs. So ABC stands for writing down your assumption, the behavior that's happening, and then the change you would like to see. So your assumption may be, it's usually some sort of like negative label, like my manager is a micromanager, or my boss just never seems to be clear about what expectations are. That is the assumption you're making, the label you are putting on their behavior. But going to B, the B is for behavior. What are the actual actions that have happened, the situation that has happened that has made you say that? So even though you're labeling my boss as a micromanager, what might be actually happening is that they're asking to be CC'd on lots of different emails that you don't think they really need to be CC'd on. That's the behavior you want to target. And then what's the change you're requesting? Like, I want to get clarity on where I can make decisions by myself versus where you actually do want to be looped in. And so this is helpful because the most successful feedback conversations are based on behavior change, not on, well, you're a micromanager and that's not working for me. Be not a micromanager. That's not going to go over well. And coming with some sort of solution about what you would like to see be different, the change. And so this is all, that's a little pre-work you can do to get your own head on straight. And then when it comes time for the actual conversation, it can be really helpful to just ask permission to give the feedback. Like, hey, is now a good time to talk about how that client meeting went? And the person may say, no, actually, it's I have something else on my mind. Can we do that later? Okay, then you saved yourself from a bad conversation. But if they do agree and they're like, yeah, sure, what's up? You've subtly got buy-in because they've agreed. You've got an opt-in to have the conversation. And then always try to create some sort of shared goal at the start of the conversation. Like, I think we can both agree that we want to do what's best for the client, so that it feels like you and your boss are both on the same side of the table versus it's you versus them. It's what you want versus their behavior. So how can you create sort of a shared vision to kick off that conversation, and then to say, when X happens, that this is the potential impact. Are you open to considering doing this moving forward? Like, when it comes back to the unclear expectations, maybe you want to say, are you open to considering having a project brief before we dive into something, so we're really clear on who is owning what, we're not duplicating effort, and that way we actually save time in the end.
Love this, Melody. That really takes a conversation that sounds so scary, a feedback conversation or giving feedback to your manager, which is really, really scary to do for a lot of us, into something that's manageable. And I love how you broke down the assumptions versus the behavior. And they're not always the same. And if we lead with the assumption, we're kind of putting labels on our manager and they're going to respond negatively. But if we address the behavior and suggest a change, and then, as you said, starting with a shared vision, that really helps getting their buy-in. And okay, we both want the best for the client or for this project. And how can we make this happen? And the manager, that positive, you leave a really positive impression in that conversation with your manager. And it might be actually a positive catapult for your career and not a negative conversation. Now, we're going to go into Q&A in just a moment. So for all of our listeners, now is a great time to drop all your questions in the chat for Melody and Anna. But before we start in the Q&A, we've talked about a lot of different strategies. And Anna, if someone listening wants to take one step toward managing up and setting boundaries in 2025, what's one simple strategy you recommend? How can they start small but still see meaningful results in their work dynamic?
The one thing I would recommend you start doing today is pause. It sounds simple, but it's pausing, because how many times somebody asks you something and right away you said, oh yeah, I can do it. Yeah, you didn't even know more about it. You don't know when is the deadline or anything like that. And I'll give you an example in real life. Like the other day, somebody invited me to go to a party or something. And, at work, you're going to get invitations to things like that and gatherings and things. But before I said anything, what I said was, can you please send me the information by email so I can check my calendar and then give you a response right away? Yeah, fine, thank you. That's it. sometimes pausing is your best friend before you overcommit or you say yes to something. And I'll say this, even including your manager. It's not because a request is coming from your manager that you have to say yes right away. Something that Melody mentioned in the beginning of this conversation was sometimes coming to your manager, but not saying, hey, I don't know how to prioritize this. I don't know what's a priority. It's like you need to understand how to have that conversation and ask them, hey, I have these competing deadlines. Which one do you think, can I deliver this tomorrow? Or do I really need to? Just kind of trying to come up, with a solution. But the one, if I could just summarize everything in one word, would be pause. Pause before you say yes or no to anything.
That is brilliant, Anna. Pausing, so simple, but so powerful. And the adding on at work, I need to check my calendar. It's something anyone and everyone will understand. If like, yes, I do want to help, or I want to help, but let me check my calendar and get back to you how I can make this work. And that gives you just enough time to check in with yourself. And is this something I want to do? And if not, how can I phrase it differently? Beautiful. And Melody, I want to ask you the same question. If someone wanted to be managing up and setting boundaries in 2025, what's a small but impactful step that you suggest them taking so that they can see a noticeable difference in their workplace relationships?
I'm gonna build on what Anna said. And in addition to pausing, ask questions. Ask questions. Don't I think what the commonality and what we're both saying is don't let the knee-jerk yes response get the better of you. And what I often see is sometimes people are kind of in extremes. They're either like, "Yep, sure, I can do it. Yep, no problem. I'll fit it in." Or they're very rigid about like, "No, I can't do that. I'm already so overloaded." And we want a balance because you want to be strategic and selective about when you say no. Even as you move up, there are going to be times where you want to agree to do something because it's going to be good exposure for you or a good skill building for you. And so if you ask questions about, oh, okay, thanks for coming to me with that request. I would love to understand what made me come to mind in particular for this task. Or do you see this becoming, is this a one-off or do you see this becoming something regularly that I do? What's the urgency that's driving this request? Like just asking questions, number one, it shows you're engaged. And number two, you can get more information about, is this something maybe I do want to say yes to because it's going to allow me to sit in on these meetings or build a relationship with this certain stakeholder. You want to have that information. And it also buys you that opportunity to say, okay, thanks so much. Let me take all of this back and let me see if it actually is appropriate for me to be the right person to work on this, or maybe there's someone else on the team that has a little more bandwidth. It gives you that opportunity to build in that pause and deferral.
I love that. And it's taking something in a difficult situation that you're making, turning into a positive. Because asking questions, as Melody said, shows that you are engaged and you want to contribute and you're helping your manager, your team find the best way to do it. And then once you have that information, you can make such clearer decision on what you want to do. Now, we've gotten a lot of questions from the audience, so let's get started on the Q&A, and everyone feel free to drop in more questions here. Let's start with, okay. How do you set boundaries with a manager when they vent to you? How can you avoid letting their negative energy affect you while maintaining boundaries and not damaging the relationship? That's a good one.
Anna, do you want to start or I can jump in?
I can start and then you can,
Sure.
share your wisdom.
Sure.
I would say, have you tried whenever they start, going on and on and on, maybe like, yeah, like, or nodding your head or something, and then changing the subject or like asking about something else, like trying to kind of get away from that conversation? Because I'm a empathetic person, so I tend to get people who want to vent talking to me all the time. And sometimes, like, if I don't set a boundary or try to change the subject, I might be on a conversation for 2 hours and I don't, that's not helpful for you because you're not a therapist and you might not be the right person to be even like listening to what's coming, and sometimes I do think your relationship with your manager, the more professional you keep, the better, because you don't need to know everything about what's going on in their life. Yeah, you can know that, a few things here and there about their personal life, but like deep stuff, I feel like it's too much. So what I would suggest, and I'm sure Melody has more to say about this, just maybe trying to change the subject, kind of not dismissing what they're saying, but then like asking something else to try to change the subject. Like, Melody, what do you have for that one?
Yes, I think I totally agree. I think a good formula is empathize and redirect. Like empathize with, that must be really hard. That must be really hard to feel like, I think a lot of times with managers, sometimes they vent to you about feeling stuck in the middle of their own peers or superior, or the politics that are at play. And so you can, like, a little upward empathy goes a long way. That must be really hard and challenging. So how are you thinking about handling that? Or how do you see us applying our strategy? Or, well, what can I do to support you with preparing for that meeting? Move it forward with some sort of action-based redirection, or even something like, that's really tough. And actually, maybe it would be more helpful to spend our time talking about this today, since that actually is moving forward. You could redirect it to a different project as well. So that always is a good formula to use.
That's beautiful. Empathize and redirect.
Yeah.
And setting the boundaries of what conversations you, or what you want to spend your time on which conversations, and what is actually helpful. And it's something your manager will likely appreciate, because venting, yes, it feels good. Every now and then we all need to vent. But if you just vent all day, every day to your employees, no one's getting anything done. So your manager will probably appreciate you taking charge of it and be like, okay, now how can we put actionable steps to help our team, help the company, help this project? Now, the next question we've been getting is, I have been working on my boundaries through meditation, mindfulness, and self-assessment. However, I still feel in a weak position and I feel physically terrified with some meetings in my toxic workplace. Is there any tool I can add to my toolbox?
Melody, you want to start on that one?
I can. I've been working on my boundaries through meditation, mindfulness, and self-assessment. Yeah, I think we need to manage our physiology before we manage our psychology. Because if your body is in fight, flight, like if we are in a fear state, you're not going to be able to think clearly. And so what I would say is in those moments, do you have go-to grounding exercises that you can use in those moments to regulate your nervous system? Whether it's, 3 deep belly breaths with your hand on your stomach, or, personally, I try to remember, like, I need to put my shoulders down away from my ears. I need to relax my hips into the chair. And those things bring me back into my body and help me regulate so I can be more present to have that tough conversation. And I would also say, early on, Anna mentioned the idea of starting with smaller stakes, starting with, and in a toxic situation, my heart goes out to you, because you have probably set boundaries and gotten pushback, or been bullied because you have tried to set boundaries. So 2 things is, try to find smaller stakes situations, either at work or even outside of work, where you can practice setting boundaries to build sort of your muscle of tolerating that discomfort. And then second is to realize that when you start setting boundaries, people are not going to like it initially. And I know that's not pleasant. Like, we just want our boundaries to be well received. but expect it. Expect that people are going to push back. They're going to be resistant, because especially if you've been a people pleaser for a long time, you're like disrupting the flow of how things have worked. And people either consciously or subconsciously are going to try to get things to go back to the way they were. And so sometimes you do have to tolerate the fact that they may be upset. They may give you a little bit of the silent treatment. But if you can calmly stand your ground, don't escalate. If somebody else is starting to raise their voice or they're starting to talk faster, don't meet them where they are. Use silence, use pauses, keep your tone level and repeat yourself. That's not something I'm able to do, right? That's not something I'm able to do or willing to do. And sort of be a broken record like that. So those are a few things I would offer.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I love everything you mentioned, and I am so sorry, for the person in the toxic work environment. I have been there myself, and I have been through the things that you are going through now. And like Melody said, you have to take care of yourself first. You have to make yourself a priority, because honestly, in an environment like this, I know this is harsh to say, but I have to say it. No one is looking out for you. This is the truth, and I feel like it's a hard thing to absorb, but that's why I'm saying that you have to make yourself a priority. You really have to be like, self-care, finding things outside of work that bring you joy. Start thinking about what's going to be next for you. Come up with a plan. If you can maybe find a different job, or maybe set the boundaries as you are trying to find a different job. And another thing that I want to say is, whenever people try pushing back on your boundaries, a lot of times it's because they don't have any boundaries, or they don't understand, or they are used to people saying yes to everything. I've worked in places like that, where the loud voices, they were the ones getting promoted. They were the ones speaking up in meetings. They were the ones getting everything, while everybody else was just quiet, and not. So it's like, I understand. And again, I'm so sorry. But yeah, start with the low stakes boundaries. Maybe start blocking your calendar. Like I said, like that's, pausing before you say yes, and start thinking about your career, thinking about what you want to do next. And as you go, just kind of try to set those boundaries.
That's such great advice. And I have a question for Melody, a follow-up question on this. Is there a difference in how introverts and extroverts can approach this? Because Anna, she was just saying a lot of the loud voices and the big personalities, they tend to get more attention and get promoted. And then people that are more shy or more introverted, for them, it's harder to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference you see how it relates to their personalities?
Yeah, I definitely. And I think if you are someone who relates to being an introvert, it's all the more important that you build relationships with people one-on-one, so you feel like you have a baseline understanding of their behavior. You feel like you're building trust and social capital with them over time, so that you feel more comfortable going to them for difficult conversations, or even if they bring something up in a meeting, you feel more comfortable talking to them because you have that rapport built. And so I think as an introvert, we have to lean into our ability that we're good at building one-on-one relationships. So lean into that. I also think as an introvert, there's nothing wrong with circling back, corporate speak. But what I mean by that is sometimes the words may not come to you on the spot, whether it is an idea you want to share in a meeting, you're trying to articulate feedback or a boundary. You take the pressure off of yourself to get it right in that moment. It's totally okay to say, hey, could we have a follow-up conversation because I had some additional ideas? Or after that meeting, I digested what we talked about and these other thoughts came to mind. That's actually a really valuable way to help you stand out while also leaning into your style, which tends to be a little more reflective and reflective and thoughtful.
That's beautiful. And there's nothing right or wrong with being introvert or extrovert. It is really about leaning into the strengths that you personally have, and that might come with more of an introverted or extroverted personality. Now, we're getting a question that I think all entrepreneurs can relate to. Do you have recommendations for setting boundaries when trying to start your own business? Then, as a high achiever, you're always thinking about what you could and should be doing next to promote your business. And I'll add to that, and you're wearing every single hat in your business. And there's more to do than hours in the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. This one, I feel like I could write another book on this. I think when you're an entrepreneur, especially if you are a service provider, then this is where like putting out there your style really comes into play. Putting out there, how do you work with your clients? Do you have certain expectations around response times, either for you or for your clients? Putting together like a application to work with you so that you're screening for the type of people you do and don't want to work with in terms of what their needs are, their goals, their challenges, but also their personality, their values, their approach. I think all of that is really valuable. So I'll pause there because I want Anna to be able to share.
Sure. For me, it's about, just to add to the conversations, about what are like your non-negotiables, like for, I would say, for your own self-care. For me, and I'll explain how I work, because yeah, I am an introvert, so for me, it's like I need to fill up my tank first before I serve everybody else. So for me, it means I have specific times in my calendar that I go to dance classes, because that's what makes me happy. That's what brings me joy. So there are days that I'm here and it's like time is going by and I really need to, leave and drive. And it's like, okay, pause everything. Everything's going to be here by the time you come back. And when you come back, your tank is full, like you're happy. So you're going to come back and like finish what you need to finish. So I feel like I would say the non-negotiable, like the self-care, whatever that means to you. It could mean something else. It could mean you go for a walk or something. I think it's important so you can serve other people, because serving other people, especially if you are an introvert, it can be draining, so it's important to figure it out what you can do today for yourself that is going to give you the energy that you need to be able to serve other people.
Absolutely. Those are great strategies. And it's definitely something I've experienced as an entrepreneur, and it's something we always struggle with. One thing I do that has really helped me is, because I'm my own manager as an entrepreneur, how would I talk to myself? Like if I split myself into two persons, of how would my manager talk to my employee? And then I realized like, oh, I think if I would be the manager, I'd be like, it's time to take a break. You've done enough for today. Go home, go rest. I'm like, okay, thank you. That's what I needed to hear. So you can also give yourself the advice that you would give to a best friend or to an employee, and follow through on that. There's more questions through, and we'll be making sure to address all of those in the Slack community. Before we're heading out today, Melody, we'll start with you. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, you can head to managingup.com, and that is the best place to pre-order my new book, Managing Up. You get over $400 worth of bonuses when you pre-order the book now. So we're giving away a lot of very cool things. And the second place I would say is also melodywilding.com/say no. And that is a free guide for all different, very specific tips for being able to say no diplomatically at work.
I love that. And I've already pre-ordered your book, but after this conversation, I am twice as excited to be reading it, and I can't wait for it to come out. It's going to help so many people in this world. It's really something people need so deeply. And I appreciate so much that you're here sharing this advice today and having your book come out, giving people tools they can implement in their work and create a healthier and better work environment for themselves.
Thank you, Anna,
Anna, where can people connect with you and learn more from you?
So I'm on LinkedIn every day, so feel free to connect with me, send me a DM. I'll be happy to chat with you. Also, my website is my name, annagoehner.com. I have a ton of free resources there, including some resources about boundaries, low stakes boundaries, and a couple other things there. So I would invite you to go check them out.
I love that. Thank you both for being here today. I highly recommend for anyone listening in, follow Anna and Melody on LinkedIn. I so appreciate the actionable advice and the motivation and inspiration both of you share every single day. And thank you for sharing so much actionable advice with us today and being part of the 12 Days of Career Goals.
Thank you so much. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on today's powerful conversation on managing up and setting boundaries in the workplace. A huge thank you again to Melody Wilding and Anna Goehner for sharing their wisdom and actionable strategies. They've shown us how clarity, confidence, and intentionality can help us take charge of our work experience while protecting our well-being. And this conversation has, to me, again illustrated that clarity is such an important piece. And that includes understanding our own needs and priorities to establish healthier and more productive relationships at work. Before you leave today's conversations, there are 3 things I want you to do. Number 1, reflect on the strategies you learned today. What insights stood out to you? Take a moment to jot them down in your 12 Days of Career Goals workbook. Once we write it down, it tends to stick with us so much more. Second, identify an action step to put these lessons into practice. What boundary setting or managing up strategy can you start trying? Be specific and commit to it in your guidebook. And last but not least, join the conversation in our Slack channel. Share your key takeaways, ask questions, and connect with others on the same journey. You'll find the link to join the Slack channel in your emails. Thank you all for joining us today, and don't miss tomorrow's session, Find Career Clarity, the Foundation for Success, as we continue to build toward your best career in 2025. See you then. And that's a wrap on today's session of the 12 Days of Career Goals. Whether you're dreaming of a career change, aiming for a big promotion, or just looking to take the next step with confidence, I hope today's insights sparked some inspiration and gave you the tools to make it happen. Before you go, take a moment to share your biggest takeaway in our Slack community. Your reflections might just inspire someone else. And if you have questions for upcoming sessions, post them there so we can tackle what matters most to you. And if you haven't already, be sure to register for the rest of this free online conference at bit.ly/12 Days of Career Goals. Thank you for spending time with us today. Together, we're making career goals achievable, one step at a time. I will see you back here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern for another incredible session. Let's keep building